online.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more people coming in, so I guess we can get started. Aloha mai kako. My name is Brianna Govea. I'm the program specialist at the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center. Mahalo nui for joining tonight. While the remarks shared don't necessarily represent opinions of the judiciary, I'd like to thank Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald and the Hawaii State Judiciary and Legislature for their continued support of our mission and for providing this venue for discussion. I'd also like to give a special thanks to my programming partners who have helped make this event possible tonight, part of the Weaving Voices series. And they are Hawaii Council for the Humanities, the University of Hawaii at Mānoa Center for Oral History, and Hawaii Public Radio. It's also my great pleasure to introduce our guest panelists. Sandy Ma is the Executive Director of Common Cause Hawaii and was previously an attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union. Colin Moore is the Chair of the School of Communications and Director of the Public Policy Center at UH Mānoa. In the hour ahead, we'll hear from Sandy, Colin, and 5 voices from oral history about the importance of strong leadership and political representation and the power of our votes. I encourage our Zoom audience to send in questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your webinar screens, and we'll have about the last 15 minutes or so of the program for Sandy and Colin to address your questions. And a friendly reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and it'll be posted on the Judiciary History Center's YouTube channel, as well as the Center for Oral History's website. Now I'd like to hand it over to Aiko Yamashiro, Director of Hawaii Council for the Humanities, to tell us a bit about the Weaving Voices series.
Mahalo nui, aloha everybody. As Brianna said, my name is Aiko Yamashiro. It's my honor to serve as the Executive Director of Hawaii Council for the Humanities. So glad to be gathered with you folks today. I'm really grateful for our brilliant and thoughtful panelists. I can't wait what you have to share with us. And to dive into these oral histories as well. And really mahalo nui to the Judiciary History Center for hosting and co-creating today's program with so much care. I want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for their funding support that makes rich public humanities programs like this one possible. And this program tonight does not necessarily represent the views of that organization. So really briefly, our series here, our Weaving Voices series, is a collaboration between the Hawaii Council for the Humanities, the UH Mānoa Center for Oral History, and Hawaii Public Radio, and this special event we're doing with the Judiciary History Center. Our project has a beautiful intention, and that we can face tremendous change and challenge in our future when we take the time to weave together diverse voices from the past and from the present. So that's what this program today is about. It's my honor to pass it on to Dr. Daviana Polmaika'i McGregor, Aloha Aina teacher, community leader, and director of the Center for Oral History. And she'll be able to share more about the way they're activating oral histories to live on in the present.
Aloha kako. The Hawaii Political History Documentation Project features interviews with 42 former office holders, aides, appointees, party organizers, union officials, lobbyists, and political observers who share their perspectives on territorial and state politics in the island circa 1930 to 1990. It was funded by the Hawaii State Legislature in 1986 and conducted jointly with PBS Hawaii from 1988 to 1991. As part of the 50th anniversary of the UH Mānoa Department of Ethnic Studies and the College of Social Sciences, Micah Mizukami, the UHM Center for Oral History Associate Director, dug into this archive to select and share excerpts of the voices of our political leaders who led Hawaii through statehood and redirected our economy toward tourism as agriculture phased out. What lessons are there for us today as we look to sustainable alternatives for tourism in the wake of its collapse during the COVID-19 pandemic? I would like to now introduce Lurleen McGregor, a novelist, freelance journalist, and filmmaker, and my cousin, who edited excerpts of the oral histories into the podcast that we share this evening. She will moderate our program. Aloha.
Hi, aloha everyone. In the decades prior to statehood, the territorial legislature of Hawaii was controlled by the Republican Party, which was in turn controlled by the Big Five, who were the sugarcane processing corporations, including Castle and Cook, Alexander and Baldwin, E. Brewer, American Factors, and Theo H. Davies. Sugar and pineapple exports dominated Hawaii's economy, much the way tourism does today. Following World War II, many Nisei who served in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team went on to take advantage of the GI Bill and became lawyers. They returned to Hawaii from school on the mainland with a vision for change. And in 1954, fueled by a growing labor movement, Democratic majorities were elected to both the House and Senate for the first time. The sugar plantations at this point were already in decline, and Hawaii's economy needed to change. We begin with John USHIJIMA. He was born in 1924 in Hilo. He served in the 442nd, going on to receive a law degree from GW Law School. He was elected to the state senate in 1959, serving as Senate president from 1975 to 1978, retiring from the Senate in '82. He died in 2006, and the interview was recorded in 1989 with Larry Meacham and Michi Kodama Nishimoto.
What was the general feeling among the veterans coming back about Hawaii and about the future of Hawaii and their role in Hawaii?
Well, I think whenever you go away, you see Hawaii in a little different perspective. And invariably, you know, you get to sit down and discuss things, and you talk about what you're going to do, what's going to happen when you get back there. And I think most of us felt that we want to come back and do something worthwhile, something to change the economic, social areas that we felt should be changed. And I think that's the reason why so many of them decided that perhaps law was a vehicle that they should get into. At that time, Hawaii was predominantly Republican, and you had the plantation mentality, you had the Big Five mentality. With the limited amount of education that we had at that time, just out of high school, I think we knew that something was not right, that people have been restricted insofar as fulfilling their aspirations. And funny thing is that when you get away, you look at things in a little different light. You know, the perspective is a little different. Hawaii is just a small little place in the Pacific. You think of things that you can do to perhaps better the general welfare of the people. And I think there was this burning desire to change things, and do it in an evolutionary way, not through revolution, you know. And there were those elements when I came back. You know, the unions became very aggressive, and they wanted to change overnight and things of that sort. I think we were more along thinking that things could be done through the political arena. I think that's the reason why so many of us came back, and as I said, in 1954, it was the first time that when they were ready to run for office. And this is where I think the whole impetus began. People got interested in politics. People got involved. Things were just ripe, because up to that point, of course, you know, Hawaii was a pretty closed society. Everything was tokenism. The supervisory people were more republicanly inclined. The rank and file were more democratically inclined. So you could see that cleavage very easily. So what we really wanted to do was open up that society a little more, so that we have a little better mobility based upon ability. And to a certain extent, I think we did it.
Thank you, Lurleen. So Senator USHIJIMA speaks about how many veterans returning home felt this call to become politically engaged in their community after the devastation of World War II on Hawaii society. And so eventually they became lawyers and politicians. And so I wanted to ask Sandy and Colin if you can address the political climate we're all experiencing under the COVID-19 pandemic, and what kind of leadership do we need right now to make it through this together?
I can go first. So I think that we are divided in an extraordinary way, and saying that is hardly going to come as a surprise to anyone. Who would have thought that wearing a mask or some of these public health regulations would become a highly politicized issue, and it has. That's not to say Hawaii after World War II wasn't divided. There were fierce divides in the Democratic Party between the communists and those who wanted a more evolutionary approach to change. But I think what they had at that time that perhaps we lack now is leadership that is nimble and relatively transparent. I think nimble to take risks and make and attempt things that wouldn't be attempted in normal times. And that really required, I think, a lot of talented communication. Governor Burns, from what I understand, was not a very talented speaker, but he was very talented at recruiting candidates and building coalitions. And that's what was necessary to make the change that they ended up making. I went back to read the 1952 Democratic Party platform before this, and it's sort of amazing in how specific it is. It advocates for tax reform, small business support, land available for purchase in fee simple terms, high quality schools. They had a clear plan, and I think that's something that we've lost. They also had a sort of a fire that we've lost. I mean, a passion for really making change. And so I think that's the sort of leadership that they had after World War II that I wonder if we have that today.
Oh, Sandy, you're muted.
Still muted. Thank you. So I just want to describe a little bit about what Common Cause does. So we are a nonpartisan national organization, and I am with the state chapter, and we are focused on upholding democracy, the traditional values of democracy, and making sure that people's voices are heard in government. And so what really stood out to me about John USHIJIMA's recorded statement is that he said that he wanted people to get interested in government and in politics, and he wanted to remove tokenism in government. And he wanted to open up society. And this is exactly what Common Cause's mission is. We want to make sure that everyone's voices is heard in government. And I think that's what is also lacking currently right now, or that's what people's perception is that's lacking in government right now, specifically in Hawaii government. And I refer back to what Colin said. There was a specific plan that was had in the 1950s to get people involved. There was good communication, and certainly that isn't what is seen right now with the COVID pandemic. We have these emergency proclamations that suspended Sunshine Law. It was suspended for several months. We now have an abbreviated Sunshine Law where we can have public meetings, which is good. But for several months, we didn't know what our government, state government was doing. And it certainly was functioning, but it was functioning in the dark where everyone was terrified. Our government didn't seem to be communicating very well. Our public records laws is still suspended. We don't know, we can't get access to public records. There's so much data that's missing that we can't get access to. So certainly that's some big problems that we need to address. Our government is functioning, but it's functioning in the dark. And we as the public need access to our government. We need better communication from our government elected officers. And that those are certain issues that's going on. And Colin addressed that very well, that there was communications, there were plans, and we as the public would like to see that from our government, from our elected officials today.
Thank you, Sandy and Colin. Lurleen, if you want to head on with the next.
Okay, moving on to the second interviewee is William S. Richardson, better known as CJ. He was born in 1919 in Honolulu, graduating from Cincinnati College of Law in 1943. He served in the Army from 43 to 46 and entered into private law practice back in Hawaii, and where he stayed until 1962, when he was asked by John Burns to run for lieutenant governor with him as a Democrat. And in 1962, they won and became the Burns administration. He was appointed Chief Justice in 1966, serving until 1982, when he became a Bishop Estate trustee the following year. He died in 2010, and this interview was recorded on January 24th, 1990, with Dan Tuttle, who is a political scientist and longtime political observer of Hawaii, of local politics, and he passed away around 10 years ago.
My father had been a Democrat, but you know, you didn't dare tell anybody you were a Democrat. My wife's family, rock rib Republicans at first. She had to go around explaining and apologizing for the actions of her husband as a Democrat. And it really didn't mean that much because the Democrats had nothing anyway. There was no Democratic Party to speak of.
And you were young, right out of law school. You were also Hawaiian, whereas a lot of these other young men were more or less Japanese.
Yeah.
Did Burns come out directly to you and say, well, you know, we want you to talk to Hawaiian people?
Yeah, he wanted me to recruit Hawaiians into the party. I think that was his main assignment to me. Get the Hawaiians interested in the party and make them Democrats. How successful I was, I don't know.
Well, historically, Hawaiians and part Hawaiians have tended to be Republicans, right?
Yes.
Well, the Democratic Party had a lot of trouble with so-called communists today. Did that affect you, or were you, that tied up with the party yet?
That's what split the party some. I was so new at that time, I didn't know exactly what happened. But I do remember Rice from Kauai. I think the convention started in the morning, and by noontime, I could see Charlie Rice, I think it was, or his brother, saying, "I can't stand this any longer, I'm leaving." And then it was a question of who is going to follow him out, you know. And a number of them followed him out, but it was a minority, and we carried on then, and I got my first schooling on what politics was like, and they took on the hard problems of the day and pounded out a program that was the program for the next 25, 30 years.
Yeah, well, this came about in 52, I believe. Did you realize as you went from 52 to 54, or did you have any real notion that you're going to have a great victory such as you had in 54?
Well, we knew it was coming sooner or later. We didn't know it was going to come that, you know, in such a great majority would come all of a sudden. You know, we were fighting it out just to get more Democrats. All of a sudden, everybody that wanted to run seemed to win. It was a coming together of the 442 boys that now had returned from law school, and the hard work of Burns, I would say, in picking them virtually when they got off the boat to join the Democratic Party and start working for it. After we won, there were only 3 Republicans and 12 Democrats, and almost all 12 didn't know exactly what was going on, but we knew what we wanted to do, and how we were going to do it, we weren't exactly sure.
Thank you, Micah. So Chief Justice Richardson speaks about party ties and allegiance in the 50s and who the different parties historically represented. So I wanted to ask Sandy and Colin, what was the evolution of the two-party system in local politics? What does it look like over the years? Is the Democratic Party still the party of the labor unions, for example?
Sure, I think that's a great question. And it's great to hear the Chief Justice Richardson describe the formation of this, in some ways, unlikely political coalition. I mean, this is a story about politics too, and the talent of Burns to knit together a coalition of the 100th and 442nd veterans and plantation workers, which is sort of non-obvious, to compete in a political environment that was very hostile. And I think that's more or less, I mean, that structure has maintained. I mean, Hawaii is still one of the most democratic states in the country. I think what's shifted, though, is, you know, everyone's heard this phrase, all politics is local, but today really all politics is national in a profound way, even to the extent that people understand local politics through a national lens, because that's the way it's represented in our polarized world. And I think the group that's been primarily hurt by this is the local Republican Party, which I think as a result of a rightward shift on the mainland and Trumpism, it's become harder to compete, which means they can't attract candidates, which means the party itself becomes a bit more extreme. And the flip side of that, I think, is that our Democratic Party, to be blunt, has become a little bit lazy. I mean, there's a sense among voters when you poll them that they feel the party is unaccountable. It doesn't have the kind of vigorous competition that's good for democracy. I think in some ways it starts to look like an incumbency protection racket, and politics becomes a little opaque. And that, I don't think, was the design of this. I mean, it was designed to fight for working people, and I'm not sure it has the same fire it started out as. But I think I'm beginning to see change, actually. I was waiting for a long time to have more progressive challenges to the mainstream party members. And I think you're beginning to see that in the primary. We had challenges from candidates like Kim Koko Iwamoto, Walter Riddy. I see that as a positive thing, not just because those are good candidates, but because you get the kind of competition you need to push ideas forward and actually make progress.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Common Cause is a nonpartisan organization, and so we don't have a position on whether Hawaii is clearly it's a democratic state, an overwhelmingly democratic state. What we care about is that our elected officials represent everyone ethically and has are accountable to the public. And so that is our position on the issue. We want to hold our elected officials accountable to the public. We want our elected officials, whether they are Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent, nonpartisan, we want our elected officials to be able to represent everyone. We want them to be held to the same standards across the board. We don't want them to say just to have a letter after their name to only represent the party and to put the party's interests above the people's interests. And so that is our position. Whether you are Republican or Democrat, we will hold you to the same ethical standards, to the same accountability standards. And so that is our organization's mission, that everyone should be held to the same standards.
Thank you, Sandy. And I have a quick follow-up to this, because obviously we're all just so familiar with this sentiment that the US is more divided than it's ever been. It's more partisan than it's ever been. I mean, civility is thrown out the window. If you just look at the presidential debates and VP debates that we've seen. And so what does it even mean to be nonpartisan today? Is it even possible? And what do we need to return to civility in politics and start working together again?
So for Common Cause, our nonpartisan stance is that we do not endorse any party. We do not endorse any candidate. That is what nonpartisan means to us. So for example, we want democracy to be the issue. We want people not to suppress the vote. So we promote voting issues such as automatic voter registration. We promote issues such as ethics and not the revolving door. So we promote legislation to have more transparency in government, more sunshine law in government, more public records. So we are concerned about matters such as that affects all parties across the board equally. So those are issues that we are interested in. We want public financing of elections so that our elected officials do not have to spend so much time fundraising to run for public office. And if you spend so much time fundraising to run for public office, you may feel like you are held accountable or have allegiance to your donors, your high money donors versus the people that are in your precincts and your neighborhoods that elected you. And so those are what we mean by nonpartisan issues that affect everyone.
I think this is a great question. I don't think parties are the problem. I mean, the nonpartisan question is important, but I mean, Hawaii has a long and rich history of political parties, even third parties, from the Home Rule Party to the Aloha Aina Party today. Parties are great. I think the trouble, as you just mentioned, is that when they become unable to speak to each other and unable to function, and this is a really tough problem to solve. I mean, people actually will report things in surveys that they will no longer even talk to someone who's a member of another political party. I mean, this is true in the legislatures too, in the US Congress, for example. I really think the only way around this is to, you have to have more personal interaction. You have to have more trust. It has to come from that very human to human level, because it's much harder to describe someone as sort of an evil monster when you actually know them. And I think that's often been explained as one of the causes of American polarization, actually, that members of Congress don't know each other anymore. They don't have personal relationships. And I think that would be a way to start to get us out of this place of extreme polarization leading to hate.
Thank you. Lorleen, do you want to move on to the next one?
Our next interviewee is Robert OSHIRO, better known as Bob OSHIRO, and I'd also like to acknowledge that his son Marcus OSHIRO is in the audience right now. Bob OSHIRO was born in Wahiawa in 1924, serving in the Army from 44 to 46, receiving his law degree from Duke University in 1953. He came home and started private practice in Wahiawa and was elected to the State House in 1959, where he served until 1970. He was a key campaign strategist for Burns, Ariyoshi, and Waihe'e's gubernatorial campaigns, and he passed away in 2008. This interview was recorded on April 7th, 1988, with Chris Coneybear and Dan Tuttle.
I was very interested in these so-called society from the standpoint, when you're looking at labor, you're looking at labor management. But there's more to society than just labor management. What about the others? And those are the questions that stimulated me.
When you got back from law school, as I recall, you got into politics. Well, first of all, you set up your own private practice out in Wahiawa, right? And then got involved in politics just before the '54 election.
Well, yeah, I came back with one conviction, that as a lawyer, I had an obligation to join a political party. And of course, in my case, it was Democratic Party. I got involved really in '53 as a precinct president, which is the lowest unit in the political system.
What was campaign work like in that, for you out in the country in that '54 campaign?
Well, at that time in '54, a great deal of it was putting together rallies, which was the primary vehicle for campaigning at that time. As you know, those were the days when you didn't spend any money really. You had no real television, very little radio, if any. As far as print is concerned, it was just simple brochures, homemade stuff. So your primary activity was rallies and the so-called coffee hours to get the candidate to meet the people.
The '54 campaign was an exciting one.
I think in '54 that gave us hope, tremendous hope, that this is the avenue that we should work towards if we want to bring about changes, whether it's political, economic, or social. And that reinforced the thinking that many of us youngsters at that time had, resulting from our exposure to the so-called the World War II experience. The hardest election for me was 1962 or thereabouts, when I voted against a bill that ILW wanted, and I come from an ILW district. And they came after me with hammer and tongs in my second election. And I had to bypass the leadership and get down to the grassroots members and practically explain to them one-on-one, what this is all about.
So you can get to that membership, but it's difficult. Ultimately, what you're doing is you are buying a person, the character, whatever character he has, everything about a human being. If that guy has no value, or the value is different from yours, well, that's the value you're buying if you get him elected.
Thank you. So Representative Oshiro speaks about his work on the campaign trail, and I love his analogy at the end there, where he just says, like, what you're buying with your vote, basically. You're buying the person. And so this year, despite the pandemic, we've seen record levels of civic engagement, at least in recent years, from rallies and demonstrations, and even in Hawaii's August primaries, it was highest voter turnout since 1996, which is, I mean, it's just amazing. So I wanted to ask, I have a few questions, but I wanted to start off first with what's contributed to the shift in Hawaii's voter turnout, you know, the ebbs and flows over the decades, and what does one vote really have?
I used to call this the greatest question, unanswered question in Hawaii politics. What happened to our voter turnout rates? And I think the answer is complicated. I think it's a combination first of a lack of vigorous competition. You just saw Representative Oshiro in that clip talk about, well, first hope that participating in the political process would actually lead to change, and nothing succeeds like success. And so by these early successes, they recruited more candidates, better candidates, and it encouraged people to participate because they saw real changes. And I think that began to disappear when we saw, as we saw voter turnout decline, which I think coincided in part with declines in the economy in the 90s. You know, I think a certain lack of engagement, and I would attribute a little bit of this to the extremely high cost of living here. People in some ways don't have the time to participate vigorously in politics because they have so many other jobs. And I think that's an important factor. I also think it's a vicious cycle. You learn to participate from your parents, from your relatives. And as fewer people participated, fewer of our young people were socialized into politics that way. But I'm optimistic. I mean, as you said, this is the most positive thing that I have seen in recent memory to happen, is this huge increase in voter turnout, a 17 percentage point increase. I mean, it might not seem a lot, like when you look at our voter turnout as 51%, but no state anywhere ever, when they moved to mail-in balloting, has seen this increase. I asked one of the nation's leading voting experts if he could explain this, and he emailed me back and said, wow, I have no idea. I've never seen that before. So we at least are moving in the right direction for the first time in a long time.
Oh, sorry, Sandy, you did.
I'm always muted. No, that is absolutely true. We have blown all the prognosticators out of the water with that. We have certainly increased voting turnout with our August primary elections, way out of the water there. So yes, it's the voters of Hawaii, the citizens of Hawaii need to be applauded for that. And the Office of Elections and the county clerks and elections administrators also need to be applauded for their great work. So definitely it went smoothly. It went well, and the current November elections season is also going well too. Over a third of Oahu's voters have returned their ballot already, so that is amazing. And so we have 2 weeks left. So, and I had heard that people are already turning out at the voter service centers on Oahu, at Kapolei Hale and Honolulu Hale to vote today. So today is the first day that the voter service center is open statewide. So that is great news.
I did have another follow-up, Sandy, about, I know you're very informed about the process of voting, the safeties of voting. And so aside from, you know, this big turnout, there's also been on the other side, the fear mongering around voter fraud, trying to quell this, you know, this resurgence in voting to get people afraid or what's the word? not have their faith in the system, essentially. And so that's, you know, attempts to defund the Postal Service. I've even seen like unlicensed ballot boxes, kind of confusing people as to where they should be returning their ballot. So can you just talk about this myth of voter fraud? What are the regulations, the safety checks that go in with sending a mail-in ballot, for instance, and where do we actually see voter suppression today?
Yes, thank you for that question. So really, voter fraud is a myth. There is very, very little evidence of voter fraud, whether in person or vote by mail. Hawaii is the 5th state that does all voting by mail. Utah, Washington State, Oregon State, Colorado State, and Hawaii. So there's 5 states that do all vote by mail. And there's just really, really very little evidence of voter fraud, whether in person or voting by mail. So the Brennan Center of New York University Law School had done a comprehensive study. And so it's actually voter fraud happens 0.0003% to 0.0025%. So if you look at that number, that is so small, I don't even know what that is. So you are more likely to be struck by lightning than have your identity stolen to have voter fraud committed with your identity. So that is how rare voter fraud is. And in Hawaii, if voter fraud happens, it's a felony. It gets investigated. It gets prosecuted as a felony. And with the ballot security features of our ballot, I still have mine because I do a lot of webinars teaching people how to vote by mail and how to, what the security features of the ballot. So here's my ballot still. I will be voting, trust me, I will be voting. Your ballot has a unique barcode on it, which is this barcode on the side, and it is matched to the return envelope. So even your return envelope has a barcode. And so let's say you live in a multi-generational household. So there's several people living in your household and you all get together and you fill out your ballot together, which you can do, that's acceptable. And you switch your auntie's envelope with your envelope, your ballot will be rejected because your envelope has to match your ballot's envelope. So clip your envelope together with your ballot so it doesn't get switched. That's the security feature. You as a voter has a unique ballot barcode and it has to match your return envelope. So that's one of the security features. The other one is the signature identification. Now, people are always like, why do I have to sign the outside of my ballot? My identity will get stolen. Well, that's not true because it gets sent back to a government office. And the reason it's on the outside of the envelope, it's because this is the way ballots are returned throughout the country. Everyone signs the outside of the envelope. And the reason that is because if this is not you, they don't want to open your ballot and look at how you voted. They don't want to. It just gets set aside or it gets returned. And so that's why it's on the outside of the envelope. Another reason is they will call you or email you or write you back and say, look, you forgot to sign your envelope or your signature doesn't match. Come fix it. So the faster you return your ballot, and they'll get to find out, or you will get to find out if your signature matches, and then you get to come in and fix it. And so don't hold on to the last second. Well, hold on to the last second if you're still trying to decide and work out the ballot issues, because Hawaii County has 16 charter amendments on the ballot. So that's a lot. Yeah. So Oahu only has 4. So, so send it back. You have 5 days until after election day to correct it. So send it back. You can also track your ballot to make sure it's been received in the signatures process. It's at http://ballotstatus.hawaii.gov. And so you could all track it. It's secure. And so there's all these like myths out there that we see on social media about there's thousands of ballots out there and they get to fake them. You can. There's unique barcodes, there's signature matching. And the signature matching isn't like an exact signature match. It's not. It goes through an automatic process, and then it goes through, if it doesn't match the automatic process, it goes through a live person and then goes through the person's supervisor. So there's all these steps, and I've taken up way too much of the time to talk about it, but I think it's important for people to know.
Yeah, thank you. That was extremely informative. I do want to keep us to time though, so Lurleen, if you can move us on to William Quinn.
Fourth interviewee, who is William F. Quinn, also known as Governor Quinn. Born in Rochester, New York in 1919, he moved to Hawaii in 1947 after serving in the Naval Reserve and graduating from Harvard Law School. He practiced law for the first 10 years he was in Hawaii. He was appointed governor in 1957 when we were still a territory, and he became Hawaii's first elected governor in 1959, running as a Republican. He lost the next election in 1962 to Jack Burns and returned to private practice. He died in 2006, and this interview was recorded in 1988 with Chris Coneybear and Dan Tuttle.
O.P. Suarez was chairman of the Republican Party, and this was right after Dewey had lost to Truman. So they were going to have a Lincoln Day gathering, and O.P. says, will you be our chief speaker? Sure, okay. I went to the library, got a few books on Lincoln, because at Lincoln Day talk, I'm going to talk about Lincoln, which I did, and so suddenly I was a Republican.
So you got recruited as a Republican just to make
the speech.
Lincoln Day speech for them.
With that, I became a Republican.
Well, let's move along here as rapidly as we can. All of a sudden, from the joys of statehood, for all of the friction that may have been involved, you were suddenly placed in a position where you had to make up your mind whether you were or were not interested in becoming the first state governor of Hawaii.
Yes.
What was that agenda that you thought was...
Well, at the top of the heap, I learned as soon as I got in there, if I hadn't known it as a citizen, was that Oahu was very prosperous. The neighbor islands were just dying on their feet for several reasons. One, sugar was mechanizing, contracting its employment. Pineapple plantations were being closed, and there was like 12, 13, 14% unemployment and a reducing population on every neighbor island. And so I said, something's got to be done about this. And so starting, first thing I did as a territorial governor is make my own decision, I guess, that for the near term, tourism was the answer. And we didn't have any tourist facilities. We had Kona Inn, that was about it. And so I put together a top-level group, and it had private people, it had contractors, it had financiers, it had planners, and architects, and it was a group of about 15. And I said, I want you to make a study of the neighbor islands, of all of the territory, and tell me where are the best tourist destination areas. It concluded, and gave me a good report in about 6-8 months, that there were about 21 places that they labeled AAA in various islands, each one of which was larger than Waikiki. But they didn't have water or roads in some cases. And so I started my capital projects agenda to use the state efforts to develop the roads, and in some cases harbors or airports or whatever is necessary, to try to open up these areas. And look around the state today, and every one of them that is developed is one of those areas that was designated.
Thank you. So Governor Quinn basically laid the groundwork for that revolutionary shift between the agriculture-based economy prior to the 50s to then the tourism-based system that we're all in today. And I think it's really, really interesting that at the height of COVID, the biggest impact economically, we saw 1 in 4 of our working adults, right, unemployed. And so with that, there's been this huge demand, which I think the demand has been around for a couple decades now. I know in my entire lifetime, I've heard that this call to diversify our economy. So do you think Hawaii's leaders will take this opportunity to create a more stable, innovative system? Or, I mean, what is needed for us to move in that direction?
I hope they will. I mean, Governor Quinn makes a really important point in this particular clip that I think is sometimes forgotten. Tourism didn't just happen because Hawaii is a beautiful place. Obviously, that contributed to its success. But developing tourism as an industry was a conscious decision made by the state. They had to put in the infrastructure. I mean, these were major public investments to support this new industry that they thought could replace agriculture. But it took these investments, and obviously was helped along by some other things like the rise of the jet age that made travel easier. But this was a result of these public investments. So a switch to a more diversified economy is tough, right? It's not that no one's thought of it before, it's because it's really hard to do. And tourism will probably always play some major role in our economy, but it actually, over the last several years, it has actually fallen as a percentage of our GDP from 25% to 18%. So it's already gone down a little bit. But diversifying our economy is hard because of our isolation, because of the costs of production, electricity and shipping. Some of our development rules, which I'm not advocating to get rid of, but it does make diversifying the economy in some ways more difficult. You know, economists will also say we don't have enough skilled labor. But the one I wanted to focus on that's often brought up too is inadequate infrastructure, right? What we need to do is to create new economic clusters. And this really, I think most economists, and certainly my friends in the economics department here at UH would say that we don't want to be in the business of picking winners and losers. That's not really the right way to go about this. The right way to go about this is actually somewhat similar to the way tourism was developed, which is that we need to get the core things right. We need to get the infrastructure right. And so that means making big public investments in things like transportation. And yes, rail is a part of this, I think. Adequate, affordable housing, because that's where we're losing our young people, the sorts of people who would be entrepreneurial because they can't afford to live here. And it's hard to attract those sorts of people to Hawaii because they can't imagine how they could afford to live here. And also better public services, investments in education, both at the K-12 level and at the higher ed level. And I think more efficient public services would help. And that may sound a little vague, but that actually is, when you talk to economists, that's what they will tell you, that you can lose a lot of money as a state trying to say, okay, this is our next big industry. We're going to provide some big tax subsidies for that. That doesn't tend to work as well as saying, let's invest in our infrastructure and our people. And that in many ways, and this is why I love this quote so much, was responsible for the rise of tourism. Now that may have gone too far, and I think a lot of people would agree it's been mismanaged, but it was created as a result of these public infrastructure investments.
I don't disagree with what Colin said. My concern is that while government is currently debating what we should do next, opening our state up to tourism again, how we could diversify our economy. Government seems to be doing that in an echo chamber. And what I mean by that is only talking to people it usually talks to at the table. And that is my main concern. As Common Cause, we want everyone to be able to be at the table that wants to be at the table, and not just only certain people. And unfortunately, that's what we are seeing now. There is, of course, the House COVID Committee to talk about how to revitalize our economy. And of course, we just learned from excellent Civil Beat reporting the other day that there's a Governor's La Lima special, I'm going to call it a task force, I don't really know what to call it, that is not subject to sunshine law. That we found out that most of those people are on the House COVID Committee too. And these are the same people, people within government, talking to each other, high-level business people who could already get access to people within government. Who else are they talking to? They're not talking to people in the community who have needs that are not being met. So it just seems like they're only talking to each other, hearing what they want to hear perhaps, And so that is our concern. They need to talk to more people. They need to talk to really find out what we need instead of just talking to each other. That is not what government is supposed to do. Government is supposed to be responsive to our needs. They're elected by us to represent us. They're not elected by 30 people and just talk to those 30 people. That's not the way it's supposed to work. We are shut out from the process right now because we're in a pandemic. We're talking to each other on Zoom as it is. We're having all meetings on Zoom. I feel like I'm 6 hours on Zoom a day at least. And so there should be more open communications. Sunshine Law is partially suspended. Public records, I'm like, I've just been saying this over and over again. It's been suspended. They need to reach out. They need to let us know what's going on. And just talking to each other is not appropriate. It's not democracy.
Thank you. Lurleen, do you want to have the last audio play?
Final woman, first woman, HELENE HALE, born in 1918 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She moved to Hawaii in 1947, taught at Kona Waina School for 3 years, and she served on the Hawaii Island Board of Supervisors, which was a predecessor of the County Council, from 1955 to 63, then became chairman and executive officer, which was a predecessor of the mayor. She returned to the County Council until 1984, and in 2000, she won a seat in the State House until she retired at age 88. She passed away in 2013, and this interview was recorded in 1988, again by Chris and Dan Tuttle, Chris Coneybear and Dan Tuttle.
In the neighbor islands, the Democratic Party was organized by the labor union, right, which was at that time really getting a foothold on the plantations, and that's where the Democratic Party was strong. It wasn't strong in Kona, and it was somewhat strong in Hilo, but mostly in the plantations, which dominated the economy of this island. In the 1950s, my husband decided to run the first constitutional convention. He was advocating the breaking up of the plantation system and selling the land in fee simple, which most of the big landowners couldn't do because their trusts had tied up their land, so they couldn't sell it in the deeds. But we advocated selling the land in fee simple to the coffee farmers so they could build decent houses and live decently, and people could own their own homes. Of course, that really shook up the establishment in Kona. And because I was teaching at Kona Waina, they tried to put pressure on my job and, tell me he had to be quiet. I resigned my job. He didn't win in the general election, but it really shook him up. I was the first woman ever elected to a board of supervisors in the state.
I thought not only were you first, but you kept getting reelected too, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, after you once got in, it's a little easier. People got used to a woman. Up to that time, you see, people had not considered a supervisory job a woman's job because most of the supervisors considered themselves super road overseers. They spent their time patching the roads, and I considered myself a policymaker. But I was very active in the UPW, getting organized. We got the road workers to be civil service. Up to that time, they were not civil. I was concerned with these kinds of issues. I worked with the union in the old days. And the irony of it is that although I was identified with the ILWU and the UPW, they have not been very happy to support me in the future elections because as they got more independent and got more powerful, they sort of wanted somebody they could tell what to do.
The plantation system was changing, and you were looking at a rural plantation economy moving into something else. Were you involved in trying to talk about issues of development and things like that?
Some of the issues we faced are haunting us today on the Board of Supervisors. For instance, the rapid development of Puna into subdivisions, in which a lot of our politicians were involved. They bought big tracts of land in Puna and sliced them up into paper subdivisions without roads and without water and without utilities and sold them on the mainland, because by that time Hawaii was getting known. We were just about ready to get statehood, and when statehood came, all of this big boom, everybody wanted a piece of Hawaii. So, you know, some people made lots of money subdividing our land. And it was a controversy, and I remember being concerned that we were allowing this to go on. But it did seem to me that we would face problems down the way if people ever came and lived on those lots.
Thank you, Micah. So Helene is a really interesting example for two things in particular that come to mind. I think one, she's obviously a woman, and prior to statehood, prior to the overthrow, the Hawaiian monarchy was known for progressive policies, strong female leadership, right? And then with the overthrow, annexation, statehood, there was a bit of a lapse in that. And you know, there's a resurgence in that now today, and at a national level with female representation in politics and executive positions as well. So, I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on that. But then I also wanted to, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, so I'm trying to put these together. She also talks about just short-sighted greed, using the example of Puna, and we all know how that turned out just a few years ago for our Big Island community over there. And so what are your opinions of greed and money in politics today? How do governments rebuild trust in their communities? A lot of questions. Please feel free to answer whichever.
Sure, I'll try to be as concise as possible. And it's so great to follow this clip of HELENE HALE, who's such a legend. I think she was 88 when she finally retired from the legislature. Well, I think there's a larger point here about the fact that more diverse bodies are better representative bodies. I mean, it's not just understanding different perspectives, but it's also bringing better and different solutions. It also makes legislatures more legitimate if they reflect the people they represent. But a point I wanted to make around this issue is something that is concerning, which is that there is much, although we're better in some forms of diversity, we're actually worse in other forms. There's less economic diversity than there used to be in the legislature, that there are more people back in early days of the legislature who came from truly working class backgrounds and had the experience of working on the plantation. And what political science studies show is that people who have those experiences, legislators, are much more responsive to social welfare issues than very similar, ideologically similar legislators who don't have those experiences. It just isn't as immediate to them. And when you look at people who are responsible for some of those pieces of legislation, like Yoshito Takamine, who was largely responsible for prepaid healthcare, he grew up on a plantation. So, I mean, I'm very happy with how much more diverse our legislature is today, but I also want to draw attention to that, which I think was a form of diversity that actually in earlier Hawaii legislatures had more than we have today. And in terms of greed, I mean, I'll just make a really short point, and I'm sure Sandy can talk a lot more about this, is that Hawaii is not immune from the influence of super PACs and big money politics. People are familiar with one of them, Be Change Now, which is a large super PAC funded by the Carpenters Union. That actually is, to me, a little less troubling because we know where the money's coming from than some of the other super PACs that have been particularly active on the neighbor islands. There's a new one this year called Hui o Maui Citizens for Change, which is actually run out of Las Vegas and really has no connection to the community. And it's very hard to see that when you look at their public materials. And that to my mind is what's really troubling and can lead to the sort of corruption and bad policy outcomes.
I'm really happy to end this oral history on HELENE HALE, given that this is the 100th anniversary of the suffragette movement and the 19th Amendment. So this is great. And I'm so glad that we get her quote of people get used to a woman in office, because that's so true. And so that's wonderful to hear her say that. We need more women in office at the state legislature. We are losing two great legislators at the state Hawaii legislature. We're losing two great legislators, Laura Thielen and Representative Thielen. They're both retiring. And so we're losing two great legislators, Senator Thielen and Representative Thielen. So we're losing two great ones this year. And As for money in politics, I think I said this earlier, we favor public financing of elections. We favor campaign finance reform that will take out so much of dark money flooding into our politics. And of course, with the Citizens United decision, and that unfortunately, we have always favored a constitutional amendment changing that, which is a hard road to take. But Hawaii was one of the first states, I think it was the first state to pass a resolution favoring a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United.
Thank you. So I know if you guys don't mind staying on for a few minutes extra, so we can get to some of the Q&A here. First, I wanted to thank Micah, too, the Associate Director of the Center for Oral History, for putting together the fabulous presentation we just saw, and for Lurleen for introducing all of the speakers. So thank you so much for your guys' hand in helping with this program. So I see one question in the Q&A that's come up is, oh, it disappeared. Or maybe it went, oh, here we go. Sorry, wrong section. Do you think plantation culture promotes no-make waves, stifling diverse viewpoints? Does anyone want to take that? It's in the chat, the chat box, not the Q&A, in case you'd like to reread it.
I mean, I think that what happened, I know this is a common idea, but I think that if you look back at Hawaii's history, what happened on the plantation was anything but no-make waves. It was a radical labor revolution that was in part enabled by some changes in federal labor law, but there was no more powerful or important labor movement anywhere on the continent. I mean, there were some that I would say were similarly important than what happened here. And in some cases, it was even less likely here because you had to coordinate across people from a wide variety of cultures and languages. And Hawaii today, as a result of that, we just recently, we have the highest union density in the country. We just overtook New York. We are at 23%. Compare that to 10% nationally. So I think, I have always felt like this is a misconception. I mean, that there were tremendous waves made on the plantations that explains why we're such a high union density state today.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I look local, but I'm not local. I grew up in the South, and I moved here many years ago. And I hear that a lot, that the plantation culture and the Asian tradition lends to the no-make waves. But I mean, there was that huge, I would say, seismic revolution in politics with the 442s and the change in from the Republicans, the Democrats, and running for office. That is a huge wave. And so I don't really see that plantation culture and the no-make waves and saying that the Asian culture and the Asian society is the no-make waves culture. I mean, if you think about Patsy Mink and Pat Psyche, and just even the stereotype of Asian women being demure and that just to me doesn't ring true for Hawaii, and now even, let's say, Colin Hanabusa, just
Maisie Hirono.
Maisie Hirono, exactly. we certainly are making waves.
If anyone else has a question, please write it in. I'll give a minute or so, and then if not, Aiko has a little thing, a few announcements for upcoming programs she would like to mention. So let's give it a second and see if any more questions come in. Okay, let's see. So Aiko had lost power, so she got booted out. She's joined us by phone. Aiko, if you can unmute yourself.
Thanks for bringing me back. I hope you folks can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is Aiko again from Hawaii Council for the Humanities. I wanted to invite everyone here to check out a couple more things happening related to today's event. One is this Friday, October 23rd at 4 o'clock. We're doing a Try Think program, and what that is an online, more interactive time for us to dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that were brought up today around elections, around the question, what do we look for in a leader? What do we want? What kind of future are we imagining? So it'll be a great time, and anyone is welcome to attend. And again, it's a little bit more interactive so that we can hear from each other, share, and bring that diversity together that some of the panelists talked about. Second, I wanted to invite folks to our next Weaving Voices event in the series, where we bring together oral histories with thought leaders. And that will be happening on next week, Tuesday, the 27th at 4 o'clock again. And the theme for that one is Stop the Bombing 30th Anniversary of Kaho'olawe Aloha Aina. And both of these you can find out a little bit more, I think, on our Facebook or website, highhumanities.org. Someone might be able to put the link in the chat too for the Try Think event this week on elections and leadership. And finally, just briefly, thanks to all the presenters today. I feel like I'm really grateful. I learned a lot about the elections and how they're happening this year, why my vote matters, and just how going back in history gives me a lot more clarity about what I could imagine, what kind of changes I could imagine. Thank you. Sincerely, thank you.
Mahalo, Aiko. And Micah and I did throw the links in there for our attendees if you want to jot those down. Also, there will be a follow-up Zoom email you all will get, which will have my email. And I'm happy to share the links at that time again as well. I just want to say mahalo, mahalo, mahalo to Colin and Sandy for your fabulous insight, and as well as for Lurleen and Micah again for helping with the logistics of the program. And with that, thank you so much. Everyone take care and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you, Deviana.